Dark Souls is 10 years old now. That is crazy. It's very rare that a single game can spawn a word for its own genre. Doom Clone and Metroidvania are the only other two I can think of off the top of my head, but here we've all been saying Souls-like for a decade now and understanding perfectly what we mean by it. Well, that's arguable. Because even through that entire decade, Dark Souls itself remains fairly unique among its contenders and pretenders, and even among its own sequels. There's something to it that nothing else has quite gotten, something that defies just the simple mimicry of mechanics and setting that so many other games since have forced onto themselves. Often imitated, never replicated, the saying goes, and it's very true here. But what is it that makes Dark Souls stand out among its many, many peers? Why is it still the focus of so many indie and AAA projects alike? What about it affected and so drastically transformed the face of video games? Why the hell do you think I know? I have my own answers to those questions, and they might not be yours. You might like Dark Souls for entirely different reasons. You might not even like it at all and only clicked on this video to wonder who in their right mind is still talking about this game. Lots of people, by the way. There's a lot of them. My answers aren't short. They're approximately this long, but I hope they'll make sense. Dark Souls is a game I fell in love with very quickly, and have come back to it at least once a year ever since it released on PC back in 2012. It's one of those games I find relaxing, I guess. I can kind of lose myself in it and let the experience happen. I know it sounds goofy, but I'm sure everybody's got something like that. So let's try to figure out why. Oh, and of course one last thing before we start. Yes, I know about Demon's Souls. It's good, but it just didn't have the same massive impact that its successor did. I don't think there's any doubt or argument about that. There's also enough differences just in the way the games are designed that I think matters, so trust me, we'll get to it. Dark Souls begins with you creating a character in typical RPG fashion. But instead of rolling stats and picking skills, you're presented with a relatively limited set of options. Name, sex, something called a starting gift, and your class. Though the usage here is different than someone might expect. They have familiar enough names, but there aren't any ability trees or feats or skill points to assign. There's just a simple list of equipment, arms and armor to help you in your journey. The starting gift offers something equally small, at least at first glance. But, again, we'll get to that. This first glimpse of the game itself is very minimal, but I consider it important to the overall theme. Dark Souls has numbers in it. It has the mechanical crunch of resistances and damage formulas that any tabletop player would gladly flip through a rulebook for, but it presents a very natural path above them. In gameplay, you won't be thinking about them with every swing. A class just being simple gear lists and starting stat blocks puts it in the player's mind right from the very beginning that this character is not simply that class. You're not restricted to preferred skills chosen before you know what you're doing. You're not constrained to weapon feats picked once and never again. There's a freedom allowed by something so simple, and it's core to what makes Dark Souls work. Just keep that in mind as I go on. Like plenty of other fantasy stories, we start with a bit of background. The opening cutscene paints a strange mythos, almost a fairy tale, of a typical good versus evil story of a mighty king striking down the savage, draconic rulers of the world. But the heroes in this story are odd. A lord of death, a power-mad witch, a betrayer. And your first stop in the game is equally skewed away from the heroic assumptions. Rather than the warm hall of this or that king, you're woken up in a crumbling jail cell by a corpse dropping from above. A mysterious figure catches your eye, then vanishes. In the beginning of the game, you're just one of countless undead, locked away in the asylum to await the end of the world, or so you're told. You're given the means to escape your cell, then left to figure the rest out on your own. Apart from some very directly worded tutorial messages, the game sits back and lets you figure things out on your own pace. Explore, meet the locals, get cozy by the fire. Soon, though, something else drops from the sky, and it isn't so useful as a key. You don't have a lot at this point, and the game knows it. Feel free to kill this guy if you think you're up to it, and if you die, well, the fire's right outside. But really, there's no shame in finding another path. The Asylum is the game's tutorial level, but it teaches you more than just the controls. It sets up expectations, both that you'll come to have of the way the game works, and also its own expectations of you, the player. Maybe you aren't always expected to do exactly what's in front of you. Get creative, be observant, and then come back and kick his 3-story ass when you have a better handle on things. With the Asylum behind you, you're brought to Lordran and Firelink Shrine within it. You're given one final tutorial message, and then set loose. Good luck out there. And what a place out there is. It's a world that wants you to ask questions, to wonder what comes next, or where somewhere goes. The game, at least for me, creates a very natural want to progress, not just to fight the next boss of the current video game level, but for the simple desire to find out what else there is. Lordran is dripping with the exact kind of atmosphere that makes it possible. All around you are signs that this city is old. Bricks are overgrown with moss, wooden boards are ragged and splintering. No matter where you go, and you go a lot of places, there's a prevailing sense of time weighing down on everything. Nothing is clean or even whole. Everything is in ruins. This is an old world, and if you came here to be a hero, you might just be too late. And yet, you can just as easily find signs of life among it all. Somewhere in this dying city, people are still trying to live. The hordes of ravenous monsters make it difficult, but, hey, points for trying. You can even find some of them. Scattered across the city, various characters will talk with you, trade with you, trick you, praise you, or condemn you. They're not standing in the center of town with an exclamation point over their head, but they might still have something for you to do. Or maybe you've done it without noticing. NPC questlines in Dark Souls are famously cryptic and famously tragic. This is not a happy world, and the people who do try to find peace often have to fight quite hard to get it. I won't give away anything if you're unfamiliar, but let's just say that as quickly as Firelink Shrine can fill up with all the various characters you might run into, it can be emptied just as fast. These people don't stand still, they don't exist to hand you an explicitly labeled quest and then wait for your return. They have goals and ambitions of their own. If yours and theirs align for a little bit, all the better, but they might move on. They might succeed, or they might fail. Maybe you won't see them again. Maybe you will. And maybe you'll wish you hadn't. And then there's you, the player character. You're not really much of anyone as far as the game's concerned, at least at first. It's only by doing the things you do that you gain any amount of notoriety. In the very beginning, it's just a mild surprise that you've even escaped the asylum. Some guy tells you about some bells, but nobody's been able to get to them, so why bother? So you ring them, against all apparent odds. Now there's a big snake thing calling you a chosen undead and talking about kings and prophecies and all that. But it's all just circumstance. It could have been anyone. There's a concept in the game of going hollow. In summary, everyone in the city is effectively immortal, being resurrected after death again and again at these bonfires. But if you're immortal, and you have something you're trying to do, why ever stop trying to do it? Well, because you keep dying. Going hollow is giving up, despite the opportunity. It's a final defeat, an admission that you weren't good enough. there's a lot that could be said about that, like philosophically, and how it relates to mental health and all sorts of things, but just narrowing it down to the context of the game, it's a very clear presentation of the theme. Perseverance is what keeps you alive. For an even more literal reading, being able to try again with no real loss of progress is what lets you beat the video game. If you give up, the game wins. But that perseverance, that drive to continue forward, is what lets you win, and in the game, it's what sets you apart from everyone else who has ever tried to do the same. I really like it. It's a neat theme, and it's a neat way to marry mechanics, respawning, trying again, with the message and the world of the game itself. But that world is more than just its handful of living and undead inhabitants. It was a city, after all. There are homes, churches, storage areas, streets, wells, everything a city and its people would have needed before it fell into its current state. And it's not all tucked away as background detail, it's right in the forefront. It is Lordran. It's all woven together into a beautifully desolate, near-seamless world to explore at your own pace, driven by your own curiosity. Back to video game terms, this is an open world, just a small one. Dark Souls' map gets a lot of praise, and it deserves it. It's a big, interconnected tower, full of passageways both obvious and unlikely, riddled with shortcuts to take you between key areas. Late-game zones are dangled right in front of your face for hours without you even noticing. See that tower? You can die in it. And all these passages take you not just to more of the standard vague Western fantasy castle pastiche, but into wildly imaginative areas tied together by almost comically aggressive color grading. You go from the bleak neutrals of the ruined undead burg down into the sickly yellow depths, to the pallid greens of Blighttown's rickety shacks built above the cesspool at the base of the city walls, to the cool blues of Darkroot Garden's moonlit forest, to the pitch black and forgotten Tomb of the Giants, all the way to the blazing red underworld of Lost Izalith. The lighting in Dark Souls is anything but flat, and the use of a specific palette per area adds so much to each one. Every area has its own identity, and color is just another part of it. The sheer artistry on display in the environment is a lot, and it is all seamless. Not just in the video game sense of not having any loading screens, but in the sense that each area feels like a natural extension of the last. There's enough gradual change between them that it all seems to flow perfectly and make sense within the larger context of the world, of the city. And while the interconnectedness of it all is, of course, incredibly impressive, this is what I think is best about the world. Everything feels like it fits. There's nothing that makes you stop and scratch your head and wonder why it's here instead of there. Lordran is, well, I want to say a living place, but I've just been going on about how dead it manages to feel, so let's just say that the character of the world is as important to Dark Souls as anything else. The city towers around you, envelops you, wraps you up in its ages-old decay. You come to view yourself as a part of it, a very small part in a city that doesn't care about you, but still a part. It's a lonely world, and sometimes even the monsters are absent. There are places in Dark Souls that only exist because they would exist. Passageways from one area to another that in worlds serve a very obvious and mundane purpose, but in a video game serve none. And I love them. I'm of the opinion that a fake door in a video game is better than no door at all, because it at least shows an intent towards the world. It says that there's something behind that wall. You'll never find out what it is, and it doesn't actually exist, but it's not nothing. In the world of the game, it exists. But if there wasn't a door there, you'd know there was nothing. And why would there be nothing? Don't people live here? Isn't there space that could be used? Dark Souls has these useless areas where no enemies or even items exist, but they're filled with details that tell you what they were. One of my favorite areas in Dark Souls, and I'm being 100% serious about this, is this little cliff passageway at the start of Darkroot Garden. Functionally, it leads from the blacksmith shop at the end of the parish to the bottom of a tower that goes back into the burg, next to a lake where you can fight a big hydra and take a back route into an area that's otherwise locked. Further down, it even leads to a different hub, the Valley of Drakes, that has exits into Firelink Shrine, Blighttown, and a place called New Londo. It's a great example of how the world connects and what you can get away with as far as traversal, but what I love specifically is this little series of switchbacks that takes you up and down. It's empty. There's nothing there. Okay, you can find a set of armor and a crystal lizard, but there are no enemies. A different game would change this. There would be enemies there, or it would be a shorter path. Maybe they'd keep the same shape, but make the switchbacks an elevator, even though it wouldn't fit the aesthetic of the zone overall. Or maybe it wouldn't even be there, and that little opening in the wall would be closed. And this specifically is what I think gets overlooked most about the design of the world. Yes, the way it's connected is impressive as all hell, and it shows an incredible amount of forethought and planning, but areas like this are what really sells it as real. In the same way that a fake door can help a place feel like it makes sense, like it has detail, a passageway like this does the same thing. Lordran makes sense. It feels like a place that was built, not in a level editor by a team of designers, but built around the landscape by a people over hundreds of years to suit the needs of the growing population. And once you get out of the cluttered and cramped lower city, that feeling doesn't change. Throughout the entire game, you can look up and see a looming white wall high above you on what looks like the top of a towering mesa. What's beyond it? If this entire city is Lordran, what's above? Anor Londo, City of the Gods. Now, the theology of Dark Souls is weird, and getting into what exactly the gods and the lords are isn't why we're here, but Anor Londo is like the Atlantis, or El Dorado, or Shangri-La of the setting, except it's real. You can see it, it's right there. Or at least real in the context of this video game. You know what I mean. The point is, it's the big, glittering, fabled city. You might have caught whispers about it, lines from item descriptions, and now you're here. It's introduced with a fitting swell of music as you drink in this sight, and it speaks of majesty and a grandness that hasn't been present in the decaying slums we've seen so far. But once you're there, and once you start moving through it, things seem off. Roofs are missing shingles. The whitewash on the walls is cracked and flaking. Elevators and levers are rusty and not maintained. And it's empty. Once again, the lack of enemies says more than a horde of them could. Apart from a few scattered groups that don't actually care about you that much, and 2 more gargoyles that don't respawn, the main route to this massive cathedral is utterly empty. And maybe you start wondering why. wondering where all the people in the city are, wondering if maybe you shouldn't be here either. Anor Londo feels hostile, and I don't just mean because they're enemies every now and then. It's almost subliminal. Everything's big and grand, and it feels like it's scaled wrong. Why an elevator instead of stairs, and why this giant turntable instead of a bridge? What is going on with the architecture? How do you get places? Why is it so difficult? Getting where you want to go is dangerous. Sure, the Burg might have had you edge yourself around the occasional pillar, but Anor Londo forces you to clamber up buttresses, sneak in through broken windows, creep along the rafters 100 feet above nothing. What the hell is this place? Inside isn't any better. The main hall of the cathedral is equally massive, but you can finally find some reasonably sized rooms. Rooms with nobody in them. Obviously these are servants' quarters, royal chambers, archives, but no people. Only the creepy, silent forms of the Silver Knights, remnants of the guard from ages long ago. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that Dark Souls weaves together a world that is tangible. Anything you can see is there for a reason, and what's missing says just as much. It's not perfect, but it's incredibly good at what it's doing. Lordran feels like a real world, and scattered throughout it are the bonfires. Bonfires are where you level up and refresh your various meters and consumables, but I'm saving the mechanics talk for a little later. Alongside with how well realized Lordran itself is, the bonfires do legitimately feel like places to rest. They're tucked away in the nooks and crannies of the world, and finding one feels real, I guess. Coming across a forgotten little hideaway free of enemies and danger does feel like it was made by another traveler just like yourself, looking for a place to take a quick breather before moving along. They manage to not feel like just checkpoints in a video game, despite being the one place where you do interact with those behind-the-scenes numbers that drive the gameplay. The presentation is what matters here. Sitting down and taking a break after a hard-fought journey through hostile territory translates very well into increasing stats and choosing what spells to take with you next time. Go through your storage, take stock of your inventory, decide what you need for what might lie ahead. It feels comforting and tactile in a way that I don't think any of the other games in the series do. Because in every game in the series other than Dark Souls, that is, Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2 and 3, and Bloodborne, you have to go back to a central hub. You have to interrupt your journey to rest. Sitting at a bonfire in Dark Souls and looking over the stats screen feels like figuring out what was difficult for you and making choices on how to make it easier in the future. Yeah, of course you're working towards certain stat breakpoints and prerequisites to use the cool new sword you found, but if you look at it sideways a little bit, beyond the mechanical trappings of you with a controller in front of a screen, it feels like reflection, preparation, and going away from the world you're trying to immerse yourself in to do that somewhere else and then come back. It interrupts that feeling of, I'll go ahead and say it, role-playing. It's here that I'll get into what I think Dark Souls does best among all the other things that have tried to be it over the last decade. Dark Souls is a near-perfect adventure simulator. From the ground up, it's built to encourage subtle but very impactful role-playing. You don't need a bunch of class-specific special moves on cooldown timers because your moves are based on your weapon. There are a lot of weapons in Dark Souls, and most of them behave differently, so pick one that you like. Do you want to be nimble and slippery, rushing around, dodging or parrying everything that comes your way so you can get in heavy-hitting counterattacks and backstabs? Do you want to walk up to an enemy, look them in the eye, laughing as their attacks bounce off you, and wind up a massive hammer swing? If you want to use a bow, you have options other than being a dexterity-based character who uses a bow. You can be Big McLargehuge himself and still keep a bow around for knocking down items, getting an enemy's attention from across a room, or poisoning someone from a safe distance. Well, what about spells? You don't have to be a wizard or a sorcerer or a cleric. There's intelligence and faith and all the various magics that use those stats, but there's also pyromancy, which doesn't need either. Keep enemies at bay with your spear and flamethrower them when they get too close. These aren't different classes that you have to play through the game multiple times as separately. It's all just gear choices and your personal playstyle. It is role-playing. The game isn't dictating what you're allowed to do based on a skill tree or talent points or anything like that. You can just make choices and the game accepts them. There's no chasing the proper gear score for your current level or anything like that. Because enemies in an area will be roughly as deadly to you as you are to them, you get to make your own decisions. Let me tell you a story. During my very first playthrough, I was having a decent enough time of things. Some areas were giving me trouble, but I figure I had a good handle on the whole situation. I'd beaten the Taurus demon without too much fuss, I'd finally gotten past those damn rats under the bridge, and I was in the parish. Well, tucked away in the parish is a knight shield. Now, the first character I made started as a wanderer, and the shield he comes with isn't great. It's pretty underwhelming. At the time, I didn't know anything about the percentage of each damage type that a shield blocks, or what stability was, but I did know that 1, not much was making it through this new shield of mine, and 2, I had also just found a blacksmith who could upgrade my shield. I might have been new to Dark Souls, but not to video games. I jammed as many upgrades into that thing as I could. So, some time passed, and then I made it to the Capra demon. Now, Capra is somewhat infamous in Dark Souls for being a strong argument for the toughest boss award, for a couple reasons other than pure numbers. He hits hard, he attacks fast, and he comes with 2 very annoying dogs, as well as the fact that you fight him in a very cramped arena. And, given the part of the game you fight him in, you're probably not too well equipped to deal with any of that. But I had explored, and I'd found that knight shield, and I'd upgraded it. So I proceeded to beat Capra Demon on my first try without any trouble. And that's kind of when Dark Souls clicked for me. I'd been enjoying myself up until then, but that's when I really got it. When I realized that I'd beaten this boss that I'd heard was very hard, the scourge of new players, an absolute wall for first-timers, not because I was the best player ever, but because the choices I'd made in exploring the world allowed me to find tools that I didn't previously have access to. The game rewarded me for exploring, not with XP or congratulatory words or an achievement or anything else so insubstantial, but with a new tool that I was free to use however I wanted. It's when I realized what Dark Souls was doing and what it was about, and why it wasn't like any other hack-and-slash RPG that I'd ever played. What really sets Dark Souls apart from anything else mechanically is its flexibility. Where other games concern themselves with intricate and expansive systems in order to recreate the feeling of a free-form tabletop game, Dark Souls does something that even the most comprehensive list of features can't. It says yes. Can I clang my sword off a wall to attract a nearby enemy? The enemy won't come out from behind a shield, what if I just kick it away? The sword is cool, but a little too heavy. What if I just held it in 2 hands? Can I fight this otherwise supposed to lose fight with just a broken sword if I dodge well enough? How about killing everything I come across with my spiked armor? The answer, pretty much always, is yes. You can. Dark Souls recreates the best parts of tabletop RPGs by letting player creativity stride confidently to the forefront of the gameplay. It doesn't need to bog itself down with 100 distinct systems, all with their own numbers and buttons. Other games might offer more in the way of environmental interaction, but it often comes at the expense of how seamlessly it all plays out. In Dark Souls, you don't need to enter sneaking mode, you just walk slower. There's no assassination attempt based on a skill, you either get a backstab or you don't. The presentation is such a huge part of Dark Souls' identity, more than any superficial attention paid to stamina bars or different roll speeds. The entire game is assembled in such a way that player choice is forefront, even if you never really realize it. You can try to play this game any way you want, and even if it's not functionally possible, the game still gleefully allows you to try. Can I personally beat the Taurus demon by just landing on it after jumping off the tower? No, probably not, but it does deal damage, so it is theoretically possible that somebody could. And that's what I think's overlooked most about Dark Souls in this endless race to emulate it. It gives you options and the freedom to use them however you want. Dark Souls exists in a very well-defined but equally flexible set of rules that you're encouraged to break. And once you start breaking them, once you start playing the game your way, that's when it all opens up. There's a certain level of understanding you can reach with this game, a mastery, I suppose, that's more than just mechanical. Once you know how things work and what works for you, all bets are off. Play through the game a couple times, learn how the map is laid out, and suddenly you can go anywhere whenever you want. Play through once, you might be excused if you thought that the Taurus demon was the first boss outside the asylum. In actuality, there are over half a dozen options for your first boss, and very few in the game overall that are required for progression. Oh, and speaking of the Asylum Demon, just take black firebombs as your starting gift, get yourself a free hammer. It's incredible, see what I mean? Now, I won't bother showing the entire list of these bosses and the routes to what you can or can't fight as your first one, but there's just something about getting to know this map, this world so well, that you can just approach it however you want. Sure, in something like Skyrim, you can just head off to wherever the hell you want, but it's not really the same as figuring out the various routes through the much more closed and narrow environment that is Lordran. You're also basically forced to become incredibly familiar with at least the early part of the game. Undead Burg and everything around it becomes this well-known, well-traveled stomping ground, almost. Until you beat a certain boss over halfway into the game maybe, there's no fast travel, so it's up to you to get to and from certain areas you might want to revisit often, and learn the map along the way. And if that route happens to take you through a level that you're not terribly well equipped for, you can still go through it. The game won't throw up an invisible wall and tell you you're not allowed to. And that's what I mean about this mastery and understanding of the environment. Your actual knowledge as a player gets to matter as you get better at and more familiar with the game. Maybe it sounds obvious now, but 10 years ago, hack and slash games, which is what we used to call them before Souls-like was a term, weren't really designed like this, or at least the ones I played weren't. The ones that did feel similar were more of a numbers-driven RPG, where the game itself would still say no to you doing certain things that were otherwise possible just because your number wasn't big enough. It's all back to options and flexibility. One run of Dark Souls will be as different from or as much the same as the last one as you want it to be. There are boundaries, obviously. It's still just a video game and constrained to the things that are actually possible within the bounds of its own rules, but there's surprisingly wide margins with a lot of room to try new things. Obviously, I haven't talked a whole lot about mechanics, or the actual progression, or anything like that, and that's on purpose. This isn't a review of Dark Souls, or even an overview of the systems. Everyone else has had a decade to write those. No, this is just like the title of the video says, just some words about a game I really enjoy. And these have been the two main reasons. The atmosphere that's as thick as lead, and the options it gives you as a player. Coincidentally, these are the two things that, again, I think most games that try to be Dark Souls miss. It's not just ruined castles, dark fantasy, and a couple notches above what's traditionally be considered the correct difficulty. It's the way it all comes together to actually matter. Every part of the game, from the atmosphere, the gameplay, the cryptic and unorthodox way the story, or at least the history of the world is delivered, to, yes, even the game's eagerness to punish player mistakes is relevant to all the others. Dark Souls is a near-perfect web of every aspect of its own design. Everything leans on everything else, and in turn, supports it. There's a lot more that makes me like this game as much as I do, but I want to keep this a reasonable length. I have days worth of opinions on this subject, and getting it all down to just this video was basically the Dark Souls of script writing for me. But I mean all of it. Everything I said here and more is what grabbed me, and I've had a long time to sit and let my thoughts solidify. Dark Souls is what I'd consider a masterpiece. Not for any single reason, and certainly not for any of the more sensational. It has problems, it has areas and aspects that aren't as highly polished as others. But put together, the heights it reaches are more than enough to make up for a few stumbles. I could go on for another half hour about the opportunities I think it missed, or the things I feel it should have done, but what would be the point? It's 10 years old. It's done. And it's as good as it is ever going to get. So let's celebrate what it is. A damn good game. It's not like that's a secret. See again the term Souls-like being common these days, but this game still has something that nothing else does. I've played some of them, I've played the others in this series, and while I like Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne overall, with feelings about Dark Souls 2 lukewarm tending towards negative, they just didn't get it. The pace, the atmosphere, the setting, the freedom, the art, and even the rough edges. It's all only happened once. The refinements and iterations lost something in the process. I hope something else eventually finds it again. But maybe Dark Souls can't exist in a post-Dark Souls world. Don't we all want something bigger and more exciting, faster and more deadly? I just don't know. If you've never played it, maybe it's time. If anything I said here appeals to you, try it out. I promise there's more than just what I showed. If you only ever played it once, maybe it's time to revisit Lordran. See where you are after 10 years and what's changed. And if you're like me and play somewhat often, maybe you'll have figured some of what I've set out on your own. Whatever your situation may be, thanks for watching. Now, go play Dark Souls.